Well, the Pac-12 seems to have actually found a media deal, and it gives Oregon State and Washington State a real opportunity in realignment.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the transfer portal, coaching carousel, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We'll check in on South Carolina. They've named a starter, or have they, as Shane Beamer goes into a high-pressure year. And the top player still available in the transfer portal, I think number one, is a number one caliber wide receiver. That's all coming up on today's show. But let's start with the Pac-12, which is dead as we know it, but not necessarily dead in the legal sense, because Oregon State and Washington State will play under that banner. They won't have a conference championship game, but they do appear to have found a television arrangement, and it's one that gives them a real opportunity. So the Pac-12 network is still going to exist as a production arm with things like cameras and talent and operators and all that sort of stuff. But they needed a place to actually broadcast the games, and so they've partnered with, or reportedly are going to, it hasn't been inked but is expected to get done. They've partnered with the CW, who through Raycom last year carried ACC football and basketball games. The reason the CW is a good partner here for Oregon State and Washington State is because they're able to get the sort of exposure that they want. It's not going to be hard to watch the games. This is not going to be a Pac-12 network situation where, well, some parts of the country, you just can't watch the game. Right now, Oregon State and Washington State have to do everything they can. If they want to be expansion teams one day in the Big 12 or in the ACC, if it's able to survive. If they would rather do that, which is certainly an option, rather than rebuilding the Pac-12 into the premier Group of 5 conference in all of college football, they have to stay relevant. They have to stay in the conversation. They have to stay at the top of people's minds. And so Oregon State Athletic Director Scott Barnes has said that they were really valuing exposure over the dollar figures, which, given the settlement they got from the 10 departing schools, is the right course of action if you're the Beavs and Cougs in this spot, because you want to stay in the conversation. You want to be as relevant as you can. Crack the top 25, pull off a big win. But it doesn't mean as much if people aren't able to watch the games, but they're going to be able to. So the home football games for Oregon State and Washington State will be carried on the CW, plus Fox will pick up a couple. I'll touch on that in a moment. And then their road games, which will be with the Mountain West or against teams like Oregon and Washington for those rivalry matchups, those already have linear television partners because of their conference media rights deals. So For Oregon State and Washington State, I think this is the right move. It's going to pay them, just a few $1 million, but again, they don't need the money right now. They need public opinion. They need perception. They need discussion. That's what they're looking for, and I think they're going to get that here in the best form that they can. And it's not just the CW, as I mentioned. Fox picked them up as well for a select number of games. So the opportunity that this presents to Oregon State and Washington State is to continue to remind everyone we're still here and we can still play at a high level. Washington State has gone 2-0 against Wisconsin over the last couple of years. Oregon State beat Oregon a couple of years ago. Oregon State was ranked inside, I think they were number 10 or number 11 last year going into the last couple of weeks of the season. You need to continue to remind people of the caliber of football that you can play at, and people need to be able to watch it, and they'll be able to do that. And for Fox specifically, they're part of the Big 12 media rights contract and others in college football, but the Big 12 is certainly an avenue for Oregon State and Washington State to get themselves back into the Power Four. And if they're going to do that, well, you want to showcase the best that your football programs have to offer. When you have matchups, there are going to be 3 games that will be played in Pullman and Corvallis and will be picked up by Fox. Probably played on FS1, but still, that's a huge opportunity. Plus, there'll be more daytime kickoffs here, and you'll be able to get, at least a slightly larger exposure to everybody back east, which, as we know, or at least a lot of us probably know, is an issue, has been an issue for West Coast teams because of, formerly Pac-12 After Dark and just playing later times, and everybody back east might not be staying up to watch. But if you can get more flexibility in there, then that works in your favor. But the 3 games that Fox is going to pick up are Washington State hosting Texas Tech, big opportunity for the Cougs. If you have 3 straight, it's a feather in your cap. If you can say, we've got 3 straight non-conference wins against credible, respectable, Power 4 opponents. They've already got 2. If they win that game in Pullman, that's a big game. That's a big game for Washington State against Texas Tech. That will be picked up by Fox. Oregon State will play Oregon this year in Corvallis, where the Ducks have not won since 2018, and they will get to play that in front of the largest audience they can. You win that football game. Not saying that's going to be easy, because Oregon has done a lot of really, really good things in the transfer portal this offseason, and they've certainly had a better offseason than Oregon State has had. And Oregon is already the much better team. But you pull off an upset there, that sends ripples. It makes noise. It gets discussed. It gets talked about. It'll get big reactions. But most importantly, you got to showcase to Fox in those examples. And then the third game is Oregon State against Washington State when they play each other. That game, I believe, is also going to be in Corvallis this year. You want to show those television partners what you're capable of. You want to show them what your environment is like. You want to show what your production can look like, the quality of product that you can put on the field, everything. You want to make yourselves the most appealing possible to the most number of people. So I like the move here for Oregon State and Washington State to prioritize the visibility, to prioritize the access to viewing their games over going the financial route. Because maybe if you'd gone to a streamer like Apple or Amazon and said, do you want to pick up these college football games, you could have gotten more than, I think the numbers are in the $5 to $9 million a year range for these handful of games. Maybe you'd be able to get a little bit more, but what does that get you? Does that add anything? Does that change your current situation? No, it really does not. So I think they've made the right decision. Is the CW the best place to be playing? Well, it certainly be. When you can look at another power conference and say they've played games that have aired on the CW, that being the ACC, of course, through the Raycom deal and ESPN and yada, yada, yada. That's, I think, a situation where you're at least giving yourself some level of credibility, but certainly the exposure that you need to remain at the top of everybody's minds. Because the options for these 2 schools are join the Big 12 one day, join the ACC, or rebuild the Pac-12. They're going to do one of those things. It's just a question of which one presents itself as the most fruitful opportunity. And they're going to wait and see what happens with the ACC, as they should, and then assess what the landscape is. But you still have to think about every scenario here. And I think they're doing that by getting this deal. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Would love to hear your thoughts. South Carolina has named a starting quarterback. Or have they? That's coming up next. Before we talk Gamecocks, let's talk eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. South Carolina has named its starting quarterback. Or have they? Andrew Lyon, Locked On Gamecocks, joining me here on the show. Is LaNorris Sanders the starting quarterback, Andrew? Is it not going to be Sellers? What's going on here?
Spencer, I think in a roundabout way, LaNorris Sanders is going to be the starting quarterback for South Carolina heading into this upcoming football season. Shane Beamer is currently on his welcome home tour right now, talking to fans all around the Palmetto State here in South Carolina. And of course, some of the local media stopped by to chat with him a little bit yesterday evening. And that was when the quote kind of came out that LaNorris Sanders is the starting quarterback coming out of spring ball. He made sure to emphasize that he still has to compete and earn those reps and earn that spot throughout fall camp. But Spencer, let's be honest, no head coach has ever named a starter coming out of spring, I believe, and then gone back against that heading into week 1 or week 0 now of the college football season. So I would say that unless Robbie Ashford just goes crazy bonkers in fall camp or LaNorris Sanders has an injury, then I would say Sellers is indeed the starting quarterback. And I think that obviously could bring a lot of benefits to South Carolina because guys right now know who the top dog is in that quarterback room, allows them to build a rapport with some of the new guys at the wide receiver position. Raheem Rocket Sanders, Arkansas transfer at that running back position. So I think that there's a lot of benefits that come with having a starter named at this very point in time here at South Carolina.
In the quarterback room, I don't think it would be described as one of the best in the SEC going into 2024. And there are some places that have quarterback questions, right? You look at the number of young guys like a Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, just as an example, certainly not the only one. But is this going to be one of the biggest hurdles for South Carolina, you feel? Let's say that it does end up remaining LaNorris Sanders as the starting quarterback for the Gamecocks. How does that set them up in 2024?
Well, I think it does add a bit of a dynamic playmaking ability in the offensive backfield. Again, mentioned Rocket Sanders earlier. Obviously, he's going to help out greatly in that regard. But LaNorris Sanders, he's essentially a quarterback where if you could put one together in a factory and spin him out, that would be the kind of quarterback you would want. A cannon of an arm, can throw it 60-plus yards down the field, probably has about 4.6, 4.55 speed in terms of 40-yard dash time for a guy that's like 6'3", 240 pounds. LaNorris Sanders, I mean, in terms of just size and overall athleticism, he's pretty similar to a KJ Jefferson that we've seen at Arkansas over the past few years, now, of course, at Central Florida. So South Carolina, they need LaNorris Sanders to kind of be the man early and often. They have a couple really tough games early on in their schedule. They play at Kentucky in week 2. That's the first SEC game of this upcoming college football season. Then they go back home and they play LSU. So South Carolina, in a year where they really need to make it back to a bowl game, Shane Beamer, I think, needs to hit a certain win total to make sure that he keeps his job for this next season. A lot of pressure is going to be on LaNorris Sanders' shoulders to be a big reason why the Gamecocks have success early and often this fall.
South Carolina's win total, according to our friends at FanDuel, is 5.5. With LaNorris Sanders starting at quarterback, can they go over that number?
I believe they can. If you look at South Carolina's schedule, they've got certain opponents like Wofford and Old Dominion. They've got Vanderbilt. They've got, I think, 4 guaranteed wins looking at their schedule. But I think after that, South Carolina's in a situation where you kind of got a lot of toss-up games. You got to find 2 more wins on the schedule. Certainly, they could knock that out right off the bat with Kentucky and LSU. I think those are 2 winnable games. Kentucky breaking in a new quarterback in Brock Vandagriff, and LSU losing a lot of firepower on offense, losing their offensive coordinator. And it's early in the season at Williams-Brice Stadium, so anything can happen. But I think if you are the Gamecocks, having LaNorris Sanders starting at quarterback, it does give you a much better shot of crossing that 5.5 win total set by FanDuel and making it back to the postseason.
Could he face LaNorris Sanders, that is, any sort of pressure from Robbie Ashford, who's been a journeyman in college football? He began his career at Oregon. He was at Auburn last year. He played some. He mostly runs at the quarterback position. He hasn't really, developed that much as a passer. Is there any pressure there? Do you think when fall camp starts back up in August that the conversation will be, hey, Ashford's making some throws. Sanders could have some pressure here. What's the situation like behind Sanders?
I think there'll be a little bit of pressure. Robbie Ashford, from my perspective, I thought that he performed well in South Carolina's spring game that they had back on April the 20th. And look, Ashford's got the one thing that LaNorris Sanders does not have, and that is starting experience in the SEC. And while, Ashford certainly could maybe be helping Sanders and maybe guiding him along, I highly doubt that he's going completely out of his way to give the kid basically the best shot to win that starting job. So I think that from that perspective, yeah, there's still going to be some pressure on him. And Robbie Ashford, look, the thing that Auburn fans loved about him when he was in their offense is that Ashford, I think they called him Red Zone Robbie. I mean, he was a guy that made plays when they needed it on certain offensive drives. And last year, one of the things South Carolina struggled the most in was the offensive red zone possessions that they had. Spencer Rattler, obviously not being the greatest athlete in the world running outside the pocket, and Xavier Legette, as great as he was more so a guy that operated in the open field. Not necessarily a guy that's maybe going to catch a bunch of jump balls from 10, 15 yards out on fade routes. So South Carolina needs something in that regard. And again, they've brought in some help at running back and wide receiver in that regard. But Sellers, look, if he struggles in those kind of drills in fall camp and Ashford is excelling, then yeah, I could see this being a potential situation where maybe it does carry over into week 1 for the Gamecocks.
There's more than just a quarterback that goes into winning. Certainly it matters, as we all know. But what does LaNorris Sellers have to work with? You lose a first-round wide receiver from last year's team, and Sellers coming into a situation that looks like what exactly around him?
I think the running back room is really solid. Again, Raheem Rocket Sanders coming in from Arkansas, former first-team All-SEC selection at that position. And so I think that that's obviously a great start right there. Some good backs behind him. Offensive line, probably the biggest question mark on that side of the ball. You got Rashawn Lee that comes back, 5th or 6th year senior at the center spot. So it's great to have a starting veteran at that spot to help guide him in terms of pre-snap communication in these early football games. Wide receiver will also be critical. Bring in a bunch of new faces. Young true freshman, 4-star Mazio Bennett could be a guy that steps up there. A Gage Larvadain comes from the MAC conference over at Miami of Ohio. He could also be a big name there as well. And they also just brought in Dalvin Campbell out of Nevada, their top wide receiver this past year, 6'3", 6'4". And of course, you can't forget about Nick Harbor, the former 5-star that the Oregon Ducks, I know, were heavily in the game for a couple of recruiting cycles ago. Although he's been running track for the past few months, so he's kind of, bring himself back along with the offense as he gets reacclimated with the football program. So he's got weapons around him, but certainly you need things to gel together quickly if you want to see moderate success this next season if you're LaNorris Sellers at quarterback.
How much pressure is Shane Beamer under?
A lot of pressure. Spencer, with the way that the transfer portal is right now in college football, I would say that you got to win this year. If Shane Beamer goes out there and he wins 5 games or less, and especially if it's in blowout fashion, then you're going to see a roster exodus. And then he will probably still get one more year as long as, say, he gets to 5 wins, but it's going to be an uphill battle. You cannot afford to miss out on a bowl game again, and you cannot afford to have a repeat of what happened last year where there were some problems that seemingly could have been prevented if the coaching staff had taken certain measures. So to answer your question, Shane Beamer, he's got a 2-ton weight on his shoulders right now that he's got to lift off if he wants to come back for another season.
Andrew Lyon, Locked On Gamecocks. Thank you, Andrew.
Appreciate it, Spencer.
There are impact starters still available in the transfer portal, and they are going to find homes. That's coming up next. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, massive, like massive multipliers for everything you win, or rent frenzies, whatever you are looking for. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench, go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. This episode also brought to you by our friends over at Yahoo Finance. So, for more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. I know, right? Crazy. not crazy, because whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. They've got over 90 million users each month for a reason. That the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Cormani McLean is still in the transfer portal, which is kind of crazy. There are a bunch of other top targets as well. So, Cormani McLean is the highest rated player available in the transfer portal according to 24/7 Sports. There are others who we'll talk about, but McLean is maybe the most interesting. He's perhaps the most recognizable name because he was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He was going to go to Miami, then he flipped to Colorado, and it was indicative at the time of how great Deion Sanders could be on the recruiting trail. He went into Florida, got the #1 corner. Look at this guy. He played a little as a true freshman. It didn't go great, and he's in the portal. He's still there. He has not found a new home, which leads me to believe that there's something that we don't know that everyone else does know. Because when you look at his recruiting profile, pretty hard to deny his physical traits. They're pretty elite. But he still hasn't found anyone. Usually guys like that get plucked up immediately, and that just hasn't happened yet. I don't doubt that he's going to find a home. He's been tied to a variety of schools. South Florida could be a home for him in the American Conference. Memphis from that league has reached out to him as well, but something feels weird or off when a guy who is that talented, when a guy who was that highly recruited but hasn't really demonstrated a lot in his college career doesn't find a home. Something's off. I don't know what. I do not know what, but Cormani McLean's the top available player in the transfer portal, could go and make an impact somewhere this season, but he is not the only guy. So Jacoby Matthews is a former 5-star safety from Texas A&M, the second of 3 former 5-stars I'll be talking about here on this segment. Matthews has been tied to Ohio State. He would be the second 5-star safety commit that Ohio State has gotten out of the transfer portal this cycle, joining Caleb Downs. Now, Matthews initially had a lot of interest from Oregon and Florida State. Those were the top 2 runners. But Oregon's probably out of that mix because, #1, there has been absolutely no buzz about Matthews and Oregon. I haven't been able to hear anything from anyone that covers the Ducks about whether or not they're having him on campus for another visit or whether they're talking. And Oregon just added safety Peyton Woodyard out of the transfer portal from Alabama, who's a 2024 recruit. I wouldn't think they'll go after Matthews now. I think the Woodyard addition makes it so that they're not going to be interested, or they weren't interested. Not sure what's going on there, but Ohio State is the latest team to watch there in the former 5-stars recruitment. Terrence Brooks is another name. Now, Terrence Brooks, former 5-star corner from the University of Texas, who has hit the transfer portal. I laugh sometimes at all of this and the craziness that can ensue, but nothing gives me more of a chuckle. Not a laugh, just a chuckle. When I see a graphic in which Terrence Brooks has heard from these schools since entering the transfer portal. And he is a former 5-star, has got a lot more interest and intrigue, it seems, than Cormani McLean does. Make of that whatever you will. But there's a graphic that went out about Terrence Brooks, and it said, he's got his name in the transfer portal, he's heard from these schools. The school logos took up the entire graphic. It was literally, I didn't count the number, it was over a dozen, approaching 20 schools he has heard from reportedly since going into the transfer portal. I don't think he's narrowed it down. Or maybe someone just wanted to put out a graphic so it'd get talked about on a show like this one. I don't know. You tell me. But what I do know is that you've got 3 former 5-star defensive backs in the transfer portal. And whatever their careers have been so far, it's unlikely guys of that caliber transfer somewhere and then don't make an impact. You know, a recent example would be Justin Flo, who went to Oregon, was a big-time recruit, one of their highest-rated recruits ever. He transferred to Arizona, and though he wasn't one of their top linebackers, he still made an impact. He was still a notable player on that Arizona defense last year. Any of these guys, just because of how physically gifted they are, will find a new home and go and play. They're not going to go and sit. They're not going to go and get beat out for at least a spot on the 2 deep at the very least. That's just not likely. And I think they're all guys that are going to look to go and make a starting caliber impact somewhere. Another name to look at, I'll come back to the wide receiver in just a moment, but Tyler Barron, who was very briefly at Louisville, and then, well, he's played at Tennessee. So let's just think of him as a Tennessee transfer. Because once upon a time, Barron was going to play football for Ole Miss. Then he was going to play for Louisville. Now he's back in the transfer portal. 24/7 Sports thinks he's one of the 5 most highly coveted transfer targets currently uncommitted. And that's because he is a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He's going into his 5th and final year of college football. He plays along the defensive line at the edge position. And guys that have played for 4 years and have got good physical traits, they don't come around super often. So Tyler Barron is a name to monitor there. But for those who get frustrated at the mercenary nature of college football and the athletes that are going from school to school, Tyler Barron could be the poster child for you. Doesn't mean he can't come to your team and make you forget about that really quickly, because he's someone who can come in and make an impact on your defensive line. Remember, you cannot enter the transfer portal anymore, but you can come out of the transfer portal anytime. There are still dozens, there are probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of players that are still in the transfer portal seeking new homes. These are just the highest rated ones according to 24/7 Sports. And frankly, I think the best available, I think he is underrated in these transfer rankings right now, is Elijah Badger. And Elijah Badger has heard from a couple of different spots, including the University of Arizona, which I'll get to in a moment. Washington has expressed interest with Denzel Boston, and I just blanked on Jeremiah Hunter's name, the Cal transfer. That could be a lethal receiving trio. Graham Mertz might be looking to get a weapon, even after they picked up Keandre Lambert-Smith from Penn State. The guy I'm most interested in the transfer portal, though, is Elijah Badger. So Badger is the 6th highest rated available player according to 24/7 Sports. I think he's underrated in that sense. Not that these other guys can't be good, but if you talk about making an impact right away, Elijah Badger can be that guy. I think he is a bona fide number 1 wide receiver. That caliber of player is in the portal right now. He's going to find a home. He's heard from Arizona, who I'll talk about in just a moment. Washington has expressed interest. If they put him with Denzel Boston and Jeremiah Hunter, that could be a potent receiving core for Will Rogers up there in Seattle. Florida has expressed interest after Keandre Lambert-Smith didn't go to Florida, decided to go to Auburn instead. That could be a potential fit. But Arizona is really intriguing because the Wildcats have lost several starters this offseason, and a lot of them went up with Jed Fish to Seattle, but most notably, Tetairoa McMillan, the wideout, and Noah Fafita, the quarterback, have remained. But guy that they don't have, who was a huge part of their success last year, is Jacob Cowing. Now, Cowing is a different sort of wide receiver than Elijah Badger, but having 2 guys on the perimeter, if you put Tetairoa McMillan and Elijah Badger on the same field, not only would Arizona State fans probably be a little ticked off at it and make the duel in the desert all the more interesting, but you would have one of the most dynamic receiving tandems, not just in the Big 12, but in all of college football. McMillan was a 1,400-yard guy this past year with Arizona and could even build upon that going into 2024. He and Noah Fafita are trying to raise their NFL draft profiles going into the season. Could very well do that if Arizona performs better than I expect them to. I think they are under that 8.5 win total according to our friends at FanDuel. So for Arizona, that would be a massive, massive pickup. I think for Florida, it would be a nice addition. I think for Washington, it would be a nice addition. But the need, the fit, the immediate impact for a team that's trying to make a push for a conference championship this year, Arizona is the place where Badger would go amongst those schools. Now, others have, reportedly gotten in the mix a time or two, and certainly he could go play anywhere. He's that sort of player. Yards after catch, contested catches, everything you want, number one wide receiver, Elijah Badger's got it. So I'm really, really high on the former Sun Devil, and wherever he goes, he can have a 1,000-yard season, even as a number two guy. He and Tetairoa McMillan could both have 1,000-yard seasons with the Wildcats this year if he decides to play in Tucson after spending the last couple of years in Tempe. And he hasn't had great quarterback play for the last couple of years. This is a guy who can put up big, big-time numbers. So watch for all those names. According to 24/7 Sports, those are the highest-rated players available. I didn't even mention a guy like Elijah Herring, Tennessee's leading tackler last year, who's in the portal. But I think that Elijah Badger is the guy that is still out there who makes the biggest impact on the field come 2024. We'll see where he ends up. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.